Um, okay, well, good morning to those of you here in Europe and to those joining from Adelaide in South Australia. My name's Henry Lawton and I represent the state government of South Australia here on the ground across the UK and Europe. And I'm very glad to welcome you to this webinar to provide an overview of South Australia's formal Green Iron Expression of Interest process, or EOI for short, that our state government is running, seeking partners to jointly investigate the development of a green iron industry in South Australia by 2030. To help set the scene a little, the state government is pursuing the development of a green iron industry in order to capitalise on South Australia's significant lead in renewable energy and extensive magnetite iron ore resources. South Australia is recognised as the world's #1 jurisdiction in integrating wind and solar energy in a gigawatt scale grid, climbing from 1% to 74% in just 17 years. Now, South Australia exited coal back in 2016 and has brought forward our target to achieve 100% net renewable energy to 2027. Furthermore, South Australia has 7.4 billion tonnes of economically demonstrated iron ore, most of which is magnetite. Now, these renewable energy and magnetite resources are almost unique in being co-located in close proximity to each other, as well as close to existing industrial towns, workforces and infrastructure. Now, I'll just quickly quote the elected Premier of South Australia at a recent Green Iron Industry Forum in Adelaide, who said, "This is the opportunity of such immediate and unique proportions that it demands an all-in government effort. There is almost a whatever it takes attitude that exists around the highest levels of government to get this moving. We're keen to partner with you, so do not let this opportunity pass you by." So this expression of interest process is therefore an invitation to you as global industry to work with the government to jointly co-design and co-investigate the establishment of a green iron industry in South Australia. The EOI process demonstrates the government's desire and commitment to actively work with the global steel industry to accelerate decarbonisation. And we see our efforts in South Australia really as a complement to the great work already been undertaken here in Europe. It's important to note that our EOI process is non-binding and non-competitive. It's really an early market sounding exercise whereby participants can start conversations to assess South Australia and collaborate with potential partners. It's about encouraging industry to co-design viable projects in specific locations. Now, in terms of the structure of the webinar today, you'll first hear from Martijn Koopman in the Netherlands and Hashim Sarwar in Adelaide, who will together speak about the joint green iron supply chain study that was released earlier this year by the Port of Rotterdam and the Government of South Australia. We will then hear from Peter Natras from the South Australian Government for more detail about the green iron expression of interest process itself, before Hashim guides you through how to make a submission to the EOI. Finally, my colleague Pallavi Mishra from the South Australian Government's Europe team will provide a few closing remarks and help take any questions. Now, please note that this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available later. And as always, if you would like to have a one-on-one private meeting with us, please contact any of us from government and we'll arrange that. In sum, South Australia stands ready to be a partner of choice in reducing emissions across the world's steel industry. And I'd now like to hand over to our next speaker, Martijn.
Thanks, Henry. And good morning, everyone in Germany. Good afternoon, everyone in Australia. We're going to give a quick update on the study that we undertook together with the government of South Australia on the green iron and green steel opportunity from Australia to Europe.
So I'll also introduce myself. I'll be presenting first few slides. Hashim Sarwar, I'm an Industry Development Officer at South Australian Department for Energy and Mining. So I'll be co-presenting with Martijn. So I'll cover first few slides and then I'll hand over to Martijn to present the conclusions and second phase of the study, which we undertook in Europe. So before I jump into the study, so to frame our case today, so we'll be presenting this green iron supply chain study, which we did in collaboration with Port of Rotterdam and Monash University, that demonstrate a clear economic advantage of South Australian iron production compared to iron production in Europe. And before foundation to this study was that we understand global iron and steel industry is a high volume and low margin industry. And at the end of the day, any new approach, any new process needs to make economic sense. And before we dive into details, I would just like to set up the geographical context of this study. As I understand, many of you will be aware of Western Australia, which is our neighboring state. As you can see on the screen, the red dot on the bottom right side is Adelaide, which is capital of South Australia, which is where we are located. So the study looked into the green iron production in Whyalla, which is the second dot in next to Adelaide, with exports from Port of Whyalla to Port of Rotterdam, feeding into steelmakers in Germany. So as part of the study, we looked into two scenarios. The first scenario, which is in front of your screen, which is the DRI production in South Australia, acknowledging there are many sub-steps involved in these scenarios, but for the purpose of today's presentation, we'll be covering it at a high level. So the first scenario involved iron production in South Australia with final steelmaking happening in Germany. So in terms of iron production in South Australia, we covered the mining of magnetite as well as the pellet production in South Australia, as well as producing green hydrogen in South Australia using South Australia's abundant renewable energy through solar and wind. And then once they are processed into green iron, it was then transported to Port of Rotterdam, with final steelmaking happening in Germany. The second scenario we looked into was DRI production in Germany. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my screen, which is because I'm sharing slides. So which looked into not just steelmaking in Germany, but also the iron production step in Germany. So this also involved similar steps of magnetite mining and pellet production in South Australia, as well as hydrogen production in South Australia. This scenario involved an additional step, which is the conversion of hydrogen into ammonia for shipping purposes, and then exported to Rotterdam. And in Europe, there's also an additional step of cracking ammonia back to hydrogen before it is processed into green iron. So before I go to the next slide, I would just like to mention that although this study presents a clear economic advantage for South Australian green iron over European iron, I would just like to state that this is just a desktop study and it's not a detailed engineering study. And all of the assumptions for our study were based on hybrid technology. So as part of the study, we divided the study into two phases. Phase one, which is where we looked into the estimation of costs around iron production in South Australia, and phase two, which is where the analysis done in phase one fed into the modeling done by Port of Rotterdam to produce the end results. So as part of the phase one, which is where we estimated the production cost for green iron in South Australia, involved two scenarios. First scenario was looking at an iron plant size of 500,000 tons per annum, vertically integrated system. And second was a commercial scale plant of 2.5 million tons per annum of iron of HBI produced in South Australia through a vertically integrated as well as a non-vertically integrated system. And the results produced from these scenarios were produced by Monash University, which then fed into modeling done by Port of Rotterdam. So I'll hand over to Martin to give an overview of the phase two, which is where we took the second phase of the study.
Thanks, Hashim. So, effectively, as Hashim explained, we are considering a future world in which decarbonization of the steel industry is necessary. So green steel is the product needed. We didn't compare to the current state or use of natural gas for DRI. So it's steel production in Germany, and scenario steel is a green iron production in Germany, where you have the integrated facilities going forward. So next slide is the outcome. We're just going to keep it short here. The financial model took into account all the aspects of the production and the transport all the way until the end product. And we found that within the margins of error of the model, again, keep in mind it's high level, there seems to be a very clear advantage of around 20%, a little bit over 20% of producing the DRI in Australia and shipping the DRI, the HBI effectively through the port of Rotterdam to the German steel industries. And clearly the advantage comes from the fact that you don't have to transport hydrogen and iron ore at the same time, particularly hydrogen with its in the form of ammonia, producing ammonia, cracking it back leads to extra cost. Next slide. Yeah, so basically, as mentioned, there is a clear cost advantage. We've taken into account cost figures for 2030. We do, however, also are very conscious of a few other aspects that are very relevant, and that is the fact that if you want to build up a very large steel industry that requires significant investments, we see at the moment that Europe is provide significant funds for the greenification, the decarbonization of the steel industry. If you would outsource the iron production to Australia, then clearly the investments would have to go into Australia. And we see at the moment the policymakers in Europe very much focusing, and then Europe meaning Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, France, and Spain. We see that there's very much a focus on trying to transform the iron production in Europe first, so have the DRI production in Europe first. But we do believe that with the cost differential, there is a certain point at which the steel industry will definitely have to accept that it's just so much more cost effective outsourcing the DRI. So we feel that is probably going to happen in the second half of the next decade. We'll see that the DRI production gets outsourced, and South Australia then phenomenally well positioned with the high quality magnetite and the good sun and wind conditions to produce the cheap green energy.
Thanks, Martin. Sorry, just to finish off our part on green iron supply chain study. We acknowledge that whilst there is a clear economic advantage of South Australian iron production over European iron production, we understand that there are some key factors that we need to consider, and some are as we acknowledge that hydrogen-based DRI is an emerging technology, and there is no commercial scale hydrogen-based DRI plant in the world, and we also acknowledge that the use of hydrogen, 100% hydrogen as a reductant gas still has some complications which are under research. We also found out through this study that steelmakers in Europe want to retain their sovereign capability, and this is where our pitch is to complement, not to compete. We understand that offshoring hydrogen-intensive processes to South Australia would ensure that hydrogen invested in critical and hard-to-abate sectors in Europe. We also acknowledge that workforce is going to be a critical factor to realize this green iron opportunity. And this is where South Australian government is partnering with our local institutions and vocational training providers to equip the workforce for the modern industries. And we also acknowledge that for European steelmakers, it's about the diversity and flexibility of supply chain, and which is where our aim is not to be your only supplier, but one of your supplier, particularly to be your partner of choice. And just to explain that, so we have started to see that steelmakers are coming to a point where they are willing to share risk between them, particularly around finding the right size of plant and integrating it into a variable renewable grid. And you have the best chance to do it in a location where you have abundant magnetite, abundant renewable energy in form of solar and wind, and also with stable regulatory environment, which is what South Australia is. And this is where the partner of choice becomes important. We also acknowledge that there are risks with concurrent scaling of core-dependent industries such as hydrogen and magnetite, and which is where we see the South Australian government's focus for the next few years. And we also understand that there are concerns around transportation of magnetite pellets and HBI around the dust formation. which is what needs to be studied a bit further before this industry is developed.
Well, thank you very much again for joining us, and to Pallavi in Berlin and Henry for assisting us to organise this. So, as Hashim has mentioned, my role is Principal Industry Development within the South Australian Department for Energy and Mining. And we'll just now run through the expression of interest at a high level for you. So, South Australian Government has, where we are with this expression of interest is really an endgame for South Australia that represents a couple of decades of very focused effort towards this clean energy transformation of our economy. And the documents that you see in front of you there today is the red document at the back is the South Australian Economic Statement. And that was released by our Premier in April a couple of years ago. And that has some really key objectives in there, which is to capitalise on the global green transition, to be a partner of choice in an insecure world, and to build South Australia's talent. But within that document, it also has some key statements that are particularly important for industry that give you an insight into what the government is thinking. And one of those is to place ourselves at the centre of finding solutions to global problems. And I'll go through that a bit later. The South Australian community has a history of doing exactly that. There's also statements recognising that the governments have a role to share the risks during transitions for this clean energy transition. The next document is the State Prosperity Project, which is a clear statement from the government of its two major economic priorities. And the first one is the copper opportunity. We host over 70% of Australia's copper resource. We have BHP, Olympic Dam, which is going through a process of expansion. But the other opportunity that is front and centre in the government's mind is the green iron opportunity. And this brings together all of the comparative advantages of South Australia to work with the global industry to find a solution to decarbonising global supply chains for steelmaking. Now, as Hashim pointed out earlier, it is the focus of government is to not deindustrialise our partner countries. It is very much about that complementary role, which is what makes techno-economic sense to do in South Australia, where we have co-located renewable energy, magnetite, gas, we have a workforce, and we have the will to make change happen. And so then that is expressed in the green iron and steel strategy that the Premier and our Minister released on the 20th of June when we started this expression of interest process with an industry forum. And that is the same timeframe where the expression of interest document was released. Now, all of these documents are available from us and from the Department for Energy and Mining's website, and we'll certainly be sending you out links following this webinar. So what is the expression of interest? So importantly, it is a global market sounding program. It is not a competitive process. It is not a procurement. It is very much about asking industry, what are the opportunities? How do we work together? So our ask of you is to tell us within our state what type of projects you're interested in, where they might be attractive for you to place them, but importantly, how much of what materials do you need by when to make them happen. And then where there are barriers, and every location around the world has its shortcomings, it's to work with us to say work out what you can resolve by yourself, what you can resolve with your commercial partners, but what we might need to work together on, but also for us to work with the federal government, the Australian federal government, to remove barriers to make your project happen. And so it is a real clear statement of that our government's desire to actively develop this green iron and steel sector in South Australia, with an emphasis particularly on the iron component as that partner of choice to support you to decarbonise your operations in Europe. So where are we at in that process? We are a few months into it, but the important thing is this webinar is a call to action for yourselves to reach out to us to make sure that you put something in, because it's not a competitive process. It's really put in a submission to us that enables us to engage and refine your needs, clarify with you what your needs are in the month that follows that 1st of October closing date. So I'll just run through what we've heard so far from participants. The first two phases were really listening phases, where we had the industry forum, and then we went online and engaged with industry further who were unable to attend that forum. Now, clearly what we heard was that iron making requires a lot of gas. In particular, we've heard that most iron makers are interested in a gas start. Now, South Australia has gas. It has connectivity, has pipelines of gas that I'll show soon are in proximity to our existing smelters, but it also has the renewable energy resources that are needed to make hydrogen. And so that is a big work program that we're engaged in, is to make sure that in the timeframes that industry are looking at, that we work together to make sure that the gas that people need, that it is made available for the purpose of this activity. Now, that's 15 to 30 petajoules, so we're aware of the task. With electricity, 7 to 10 terawatt hours. We need a lot of energy in order to make this happen. In regards to water, we know, I'll come to water soon, but the government has a project, which is the Northern Water Project, which is a key investment that it's looking at making in order to support BHP's Olympic Dam expansion. But that also opens up hydrogen production in the areas where that 600-kilometre pipeline runs. Magnetite, understandably, that is the iron ore that people are after, and we have a lot of that available, so I'll run through that soon. Land, we've committed to a process where we are in the first instance looking to industry. Now, if you're joining this process later, our expectation of you is not to identify a parcel of land or a specific location that you're interested in. We will be able to assist you in subsequent phases. It's important to, like I say, make a submission so that we know to reach out to you. Project approvals. We heard very clearly from project developers about the importance of timely approvals, and certainly the South Australian government is taking further measures to make sure that project approvals are not a barrier to construction of projects, which includes they are in final stages with Office of a Coordinator General to support projects through this process. So when we look at the why around South Australia, Hashim indicated where we were, sort of placed, I suppose, earlier, but that circle that it shows there represents the Upper Spencer Gulf region that the South Australian Premier is very focused upon a new era of prosperity for the Upper Spencer Gulf. And those two red dots within the circle reflect the Trafigura Near Stars smelter on the right-hand side. The east side is their polymetallic smelter at Port Pirie, which is a very advanced and recently upgraded facility. And then the red dot on the left side there, the western side, is actually the Liberty Steel's steelworks at Whyalla. And it's this area in the Upper Spencer Gulf where we're particularly focused, and you'll see the comparative advantages as I move through this today. So our story of when we look at green iron, noting that what we've heard is that the lowest risk, the techno commercial path to green iron is a gas start, is that you really want to know that if you are even starting with gas rather than a hydrogen heavy start, is that when you are setting your path to transition to a hydrogen-based direct reduced iron, is that the renewable energy is available in that location. And the reputation of South Australia is that we are beyond the point where decarbonising our own electricity is a point of discussion in the community. It is now about 2027, we'll have all of our own needs met by renewable generation in the state. And we then are looking at moving into this era of energy abundance. And so what the government has, consecutive governments have really worked on, of both Labor and Liberal, it's a bipartisan commitment to this trajectory in South Australia, is towards that clean energy economy. And we've led Australia, and we've certainly, a benchmark we feel for the world as well. And what the state government and Parliament have put in place is that legislative framework for industrial scale renewable energy and hydrogen production. And that's reflected in this Act that is now law in South Australia and has regulations in place, which is the Hydrogen and Renewable Energy Act, which brings several pieces of legislation together for a one-stop shop approval pathway for major hydrogen and renewable energy projects. And importantly, only yesterday, I think it's yesterday or today, one of the two, is that yesterday the Hydrogen and Renewable Energy Act, the first release areas were put out. Now, on the left-hand side, you'll see that the red dots represent where the existing smelters are in South Australia, Whyalla, Port Pirie and Olympic Dam. And that outline there represents two release areas that the government is consulting on, currently seeking feedback. And these areas have been worked up with the native title holders of those lands for over the last couple of years, to get to a point now where we are now engaging with the broader community on and industry on your feedback around these release areas. Now, this on the right-hand side, you'll see just the scale of those areas, which is, together is half the size of Turkey, or it's, a couple of Luxembourgs put together. Like the areas and their proximity to these industrial cities is phenomenal. And you'll note there that I've highlighted Iron Knob, Iron Barron and Iron Duke, is this co-location of magnetite resources right where, these release areas are proposed to be. So that means low transmission distances to these industrial towns. When we look at the quality of those resources, we have, over land-based wind resources of 55% capacity factors, with co-located solar opportunities of over 70%, 75% capacity factors. And that's because typically in those locations, the sun shines during the day and the wind blows, of an evening. Now, that's exactly what we are working to make available for energy-intensive industries to be able to do that important value-add step in South Australia of iron making, which we understand to be 70% of the energy required in that steel process flow. So this is currently open for a comment, and we'd really encourage you to lean into the expression of interest process, but importantly to engage with your partners in Europe around coming together to become aware of this process and to bid into the competitive process that will follow to gain access to this land for renewable energy projects. Someone asked me the other day, what's the urgency here? And when it was someone based in America, and it was like, we are opening up a new province like a Gulf of Mexico or a Chile for copper. Like, it is really important for companies globally to make the most of this opportunity to get access to the energy you need, to make the hydrogen that you require, to do the reduction that your businesses demand in a as you transition to a net zero future. And the government has a project of its own. So knowing the importance of hydrogen to iron reduction, this government, one of its election commitments was to do a 250 megawatt electrolyser. So this is a government state-owned project, and it is moved through competitive processes, and it's headed towards construction. And you can see there ATCO and BOC, Lindy, there as the key partners with Epic Energy. This gives us early hydrogen. It means that you have in the state government, you have a government that understands the complexity and the challenges associated with hydrogen production, but you also have a partner there who understands what it takes to integrate large electrolysers into a variable renewable energy grid. So there is no final investment decision on that. It is the government. The Premier has made it clear that he's committed to proceed with that project. And so that's a bit of an example of the way that this government, that entrepreneurial, agile mindset of consecutive governments in South Australia towards finding solutions to global problems. They knew that they needed to get from 20 megawatts into the hundreds of megawatts to get to the gigawatts of electrolysers. When a few years ago, our current energy minister was confronted with a system black because large transmission lines went down, they took up the challenge of Elon Musk and Mike Cannon-Brookes with the NEON successfully winning the big battery project. It was to put as much grid-scale battery capacity on, and Tesla's gone on to do synthetic inertia, virtual power plants, and also their autobidder was devised, piloted and created in South Australia. So it's a state that is about not just renewable energy, it's about systemic changes that are required to get to that end game, which is energy intensive industries. So if you've got the renewable energy and you've got the pathway for that hydrogen production, then you need to make sure that you've got that co-located magnetite. And so South Australia very much is that Australia's magnetite province. We have 18.8 billion tonnes of magnetite across 3 distinct provinces, and 7.2 billion tonnes of that has been economically demonstrated. Now, South Australian magnetite, we are told by our geologists and broadly by industry, has superior qualities. It's softer, coarser grained, and has lower impurities than other regions. Now, Hashim mentioned earlier about that our complement, not compete. So in Australia, we very much are playing a national game of that Western Australia has that superior hematite. And at a national level, we need to them to keep drawing down on that hematite. But South Australia, with that agile mindset, is the magnetite province, that innovator province, that partner for you in order to prove up green iron production with magnetite. We have those resources. Another example of the government, how it sees a problem, it sees a barrier to realising its economic objectives, and it then proceeds to do the work to ahead of industry to get the job done. So this is the Northern Water Project. This is a desalinisation plant that's proposed for Cape Hardy with a 600-kilometre pipeline that goes straight past Whyalla up to Port Augusta and then continues on to, I'll show you a map in a minute, up to Roxby Downs and Olympic Dam for BHP. And along the way, there's some important clients that have got subscriptions to take that, and their focus is on hydrogen production. So this project, first stage, is $5 billion, working with the Australian federal government to get that off the ground, and that's moving towards a final investment decision, soon. So the state sees the need for water, it sees the need for hydrogen, and it moves ahead to fix the problem. It understands grid-scale energy storage in order to have renewable firmed, grid-scale storage firmed renewables. When we look at this co-location, you'll see that red line coming down here, this is the existing Adelaide, so the city of Adelaide here, metropolitan area of Adelaide is 1.3 million people. So, from Adelaide to Port Augusta, that's 300 kilometres. So these areas are not thousands of kilometres from major urban centres. So this gas pipeline comes down from the Cooper Basin and has interconnectivity interstate, and there's the Sea-Link gas pipe that comes up from Victoria down on the bottom right corner of that map as well. There's a pipeline through Port Pirie and across to Whyalla that we're reviewing in terms of capacities for the purpose of green iron. The blue pipeline here, you can see that's the Northern Water Project pipeline length, and it goes past that Whyalla smelter area. But you'll also note that that close cluster of these three iron ore provinces to this area here. Okay, so we have the infrastructure, we have those resources, and it's clear, that we have the will to make things happen. In regards to smelters, mentioned earlier, you'll see Olympic Dam, Whyalla, Port Pirie shown on the map to the right. So there is that industrial workforce. In Australia, we have, that high concentration of smelters here in South Australia with that workforce. So just to finish off, I suppose our Premier, Henry, at the start, referred to our Premier, Peter Malinauskas, and there's just a few quotes from him from the Industry Forum here, that his government is all in, that green iron is a central platform for his government's economic ambitions. He acknowledges that hydrogen's an opportunity that, whilst it's not in the immediate future for many project developers, it's certainly an area that he's keen to pursue. That he is necessarily pragmatic when it comes to this opportunity, and that he's very keen to get things moving. And he's not afraid to put his hand in his pocket to make things happen. And you'll see in the top right corner there, he's also made it clear that serious players will be embraced. So with that mindset of government of making things happen, and to be a partner of choice, to jointly find solutions to these global problems, that is really the Premier's invitation for this expression of interest, is to work with us, work with your government, for us to work with the Australian federal government, to come together to really look at how we can be part of your supply chain and an important part of your future as your company addresses this challenge of decarbonising your steel production in country.
So as you've heard earlier from Henry and Peter around that in June, we begin our expression of interest process. Currently, we are in phase 3, which is where we had these workshops last week, and we are organizing a series of webinars, and today is one of those. So this phase closes on 1st of October, which is when your submissions are due. So in phase 4 which is where we'll be reviewing your submissions, and we'll be preparing an outcomes report with recommendations to the government on the next steps. The outcomes of this phase will also feed into the de-risking studies, which we anticipate will begin beginning of 2025 or mid of 2025. So just to give a quick overview of the submission process, as a department, we have tried to develop a simple and straightforward process, which begins with you downloading submission guide. I will come to that later. Preparing your submission offline, going to the submission portal, providing your contact details, upload your response, along with some additional attachments that we have requested, as well as some additional information that you think is necessary to provide good background of your project and proposal, and then basically submitting it or lodging your submission. So now I mentioned two things, which is submission guide and submission portal. The question is that how you can access these. As Peter mentioned earlier, that we'll be sending an email after this webinar with all these relevant links. You can also access this submission guide and submission portal on our Green Iron Steel portal. You can see the link on the screen. Again, we'll be sending these links. We also sent an email on 19th of August, which is where when we kicked off our submission portal. And you can also find some relevant links into the calendar invite for this webinar. But again, not to worry, we'll be sending all these links again in an email. So just a quick overview of the submission portal. So if you log into the submission portal, the overview page will guide you throughout the process from step 1, which is downloading the EO guide, to lodging your submission. On the left-hand side, you can see the chapters that are in line with the submission steps. So it should be quite easy for you to navigate through. But again, as Peter and Henry mentioned earlier, that we would encourage you to take this opportunity to meet with us in one-on-one, which is where we can guide you and support your submission. So second part of the submission process is submission guide. So submission guide is basically, which is where we have provided some instructions on how you can provide your submission, as well as some information that we have requested around your project. So to make it easier for you to prepare your submission, we have tried to divide the information requested into 3 sections. On your screen, you can see section A, which is around company or consortium overview. So if you look at the right side, you can find like a screenshot of the actual page of the submission guide, and which is where you will see a lot of text. But basically, we are trying to understand more about about your company and consortium, and your experience in delivering similar scale projects, could be in iron, hydrogen, or similar industries. We would also like to understand that what are your ambitions for project development in South Australia, and you're welcome to submit to expression of interest, even if you have not considered South Australia so far. At this stage, we understand that some companies have advanced projects as compared to other, but we welcome projects even at a concept stage. In this section, you will also find an attachment request, which is I believe is optional, around company profile, which I understand is like a one-page company profile that you can upload. Section B which is where you will find details around your specific projects. So this section is to help us understand the scale of your project, the input and output of your project, and your infrastructure needs, understanding that green iron project is a massive scale project with implications. So in this section, we have tried to, we have also, to make it easier for you to understand our request, we have also made a template of a mass balance requirement. Some of you might already have seen that spreadsheet. That spreadsheet contains questions around how much hydrogen do you need, how much gas do you need for your project, what is the right size of your project, how many projects you're considering, and if you have looked into South Australia, then what location you're considering your project in. This section also has some questions around the impact of your project and any benefit sharing model that you might have developed to share benefits with local communities as well as Aboriginal communities in South Australia. Again, acknowledging that not all the questions might be relevant to your particular project. And again, submissions are welcome even if you do not have this much detail worked out. This is just a guide for you to what sort of information we're seeking, but we encourage you to even submit even if you do not have answers for all the questions. And again, please meet with us and we can support your submission. This leads us into section 3, which is where we want to understand the challenges or opportunities associated with the project of your scale. So you will find in this section, you will find questions around, what are the challenges and opportunities, and what existing strategies or plans you have in place to address those challenges, and what are the gaps you think which is where only government can support your project development, and what do you think we can work together and collaborate with federal government of Australia to fill out the rest of the gaps. You will also find some questions around that how you can leverage existing initiatives, which Peter mentioned in his slides around Harun Jobs Plan, the 600-kilometer Northern Water Desalination Project, as well as HRE release areas, which are now open for consultation, how you can leverage those initiatives in your project development. And also, it is also seeking advice from the industry that apart from what we have told you, what other approaches you have seen globally working better, and which way you can direct us that this works better somewhere else in the world, and we should take some inspiration from a particular approach. And who are the global entities that we should be speaking to, and also it wraps up with the final question, which is around that what is your appetite to work with South Australian government on next steps, which is collaborating on de-risking studies. Again, I'm just going through quickly today, but we encourage you to meet with us one-on-one, which is where we can discuss these in detail and answer your questions. So I would like to wrap up my presentation today with the call to action that if you, again, reinforcing, I think probably sixth time, that if you are submitting, please meet with us, and we are happy to have series of meeting to support your submission. And again, like Henry and Peter mentioned earlier, this is just a market sounding process. It's not a competitive process, so you do not have to complicate your submission. We just want to know who has interest, and we can work out details with you later on. If you're a steelmaker, like I'm going to use Premier's word, that do not miss this opportunity. And even if you do not have a project at this stage, concepts are welcome. And if you're a technology provider thinking, where do I fit in this process? You can provide a submission on how you can support steelmakers, particularly around demonstration and commercialization of these new technologies. You can also provide advice to government how we can best use our resources, and how we can support your technology. And also you can advise on the role of the government in the development of codependent industries, such as, like Peter mentioned, we have a 250 megawatt electrolyzer fully owned by government, how the government can take it from 250 megawatt to 1.2 gigawatt of electrolyzer, which is critical for iron production. And also our call to action to you is that you have clients, you have friends, you have network, please do not hesitate to direct them to this expression of interest process. And I would just like to wrap up by saying that we have proper property controls in place to protect your commercially sensitive information, so please do not be worried about that.
So I'm an investment director for the Australian Trade and Investment Commission based at the Australian Embassy in Berlin. So we represent the federal government, and we're basically just here on the call to support our South Australian state colleagues in their project, in their EOI ambition. I also wanted to make the point that across Europe, we have a number of officers and colleagues are on the line as well today. So in addition to being able to reach out to the colleagues directly from the state of South Australia, Henry in London, or Pallavi based in Berlin with me, please feel free to also reach out to known contacts that you have, and we will help with making the connection directly into South Australia. And I also just want to make the point that obviously this ambition of South Australia sits within a grander kind of priorities focus that the federal government has for all of Australia around our transition to net zero and the focus on decarbonizing the entire Australian economy. And it's great to see that the federal states have decided to collaborate, as Peter was saying earlier, and finding out what their unique kind of strengths are and playing to those. And so we're very happy to support and encourage your engagement with the state of South Australia around this issue. I'll leave it at that, and obviously happy to take questions as well if there are any directed at federal institutions or processes. Thank you.
Thanks, David, and thank you, Hashim. Thank you, everyone, for giving this detailed overview and insight of the entire green steel and opportunity and the expression of interest. Thank you, David. I know it was difficult for you to be able to join us, but we really appreciate your time. And thanks, Martin, for joining us and sharing your take on the study, and especially because you have been involved integrally on the study. My name is Pallavi, and I'm a part of Australian Trade and Investment Commission in Germany, and I'm responsible for South Australian activities in the German market as part of Henry's Europe team. I would like to, ask the live audience here if they have any questions they would like to direct to the speakers present here. You can unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can put it in the chat. I actually have a list of questions prepared through our registration form, so I would perhaps start with that. Let's start with those questions then.
That'd be good.
Sorry.
No, that's good, Pallavi. If you can go through the questions that we received with registrations, that would be excellent.
Great. Yeah. So one of the groups has actually mentioned that they have massive experience in renewables and in reference to hydrogen production, but not particularly in Australia. So they want to know what is the way to show their willingness to participate in this expression of interest and partner with companies with experience in green production.
Sure. So we would encourage the companies to participate in the expression of interest. So it's to put in a registration through our process, because we need renewable energy and hydrogen project developers as a part of this expression of interest. But we would strongly encourage them to also reach out to us so that we can make the right introductions to the people who are managing the Hydrogen and Renewable Energy Act release areas, that the consultation to really build up their awareness and understanding of the timeframes for those release areas.
Thanks, Peter. Along the same lines, there's another question on, actually people want to understand what kind of support options are available from South Australian government. Do you like to add anything besides what you've already? Yeah.
No, I think the important thing is the government is actually looking to industry to say what is required to plug the commercial gaps. Okay, so rather than the government coming out with a checkbook and just saying, like, we'll do this, this, and this, it's the government is acknowledging that industry knows what it needs. And so the invitation is to assess South Australia and then have that dialogue with the government to say that the support that you require is quite specific and targeted.
I'll take up another question. I think you have touched upon these questions already in your presentation, but I'll see if you would like to add something else to that. The question is that what is the technology support to develop DRI for the magnetite resources? This is a set of 3 questions, so I'll read all the questions together, and you can combine your answer, Peter and Hashim, if required.
Sure.
So yeah, the technology support to develop DRI for the magnetite resource, the timeframes that South Australian government is pursuing for the development of green iron industry in the state, and policy, what kind of policy are being developed in the state.
Okay, so the first one, which was technology support for direct reduced iron, is that the government is works with the Australian federal government with heavy industry low carbon transition CRC. So it's a HILT CRC. My colleague Sando is on the call today. But the HILT CRC, which is a cooperative research centre, and that is specialising in decarbonisation of cement, aluminium, and iron and steel. All right, so that is one pathway that the South Australian government is working with the federal government, is through the HILT CRC, and Adelaide University, one of our state universities, leads on that. So that's one example. We also there's opportunities because of that early hydrogen availability from the Hydrogen Jobs Plan at Whyalla. There is opportunities for demonstration scale projects to really scale up and de-risk, maybe at a smaller scale, 40, 50,000 tonnes, the opportunity to have access to early hydrogen. There is opportunities for offtake agreements from that electrolyser for those purposes, to help people to look at that integration into a variable grid. The timeframes for the South Australian government is the Premier came out and was clear that was by 2030. Now, that's a compressed timeline, and he's certainly aware of that, but he sets that mission. He wants it to be very clear that he's prepared to run to make things happen. Now, we would naturally come back to be guided by industry, but that's where that opportunity for de-risking, demonstration, and scaling into this opportunity is really what we would be seeking direction in your expression of interest. What time do you need? What is right for your business and your host government, for example? Policies being developed for industry. You've got the Hydrogen and Renewable Energy Act. You've had recent years they've reformed the planning like legislation, planning and development laws. You've got the Office of the Coordinator General, so legislation going through in that area. They've reformed the petroleum, legislation around the inclusion of hydrogen so it can be, as a gas in pipelines and things like that. So there's a whole heap of, like I say, changes that have already been made with conscious purpose towards the objective of the end game. Okay, so this is not just I suppose a lot of governments are prone to just sort of announcements. This is about steps towards this objective for energy intensive, this reshoring of these activities. So the policy has been put in place over many years to make this opportunity available to your business.
Great. Thanks a lot. Sorry.
No, that's good. Saindo has just made a comment.
Okay.
So there's a link in the chat here that my colleague Saindo has put in, which is that we're a key partner in the HILT CRC, and there's a link there if people are interested in information, and that has leading industry and academia involved in that. So please check out the partners, which I would encourage.
I would like to close by saying that, as my colleagues have mentioned, it is not a competitive process. Rather, it's a complementing process where we really want to start conversation with the industry in Europe and across the world to assess South Australian opportunities and collaborate with the potential partners. In case of any questions, any further questions or one-on-one meetings, please reach out to any of us present here. You will have everyone's contact details through follow-up emails that you'll receive from us. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice afternoon and a good day ahead.